Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Brendan with Evoke Bike. We've got an awesome podcast with Ian Boswell today where we didn't really go into some of the big topics that he's already talked about, former Pro Tour life, Unbound gravel, but more some training tips that he's using around his busy life to help him get faster that I think you can use also. Ian's now working full-time for Wahoo, and he's really getting his feet wet in what he describes as alternative surface racing, aka gravel. But he has some interesting ways of training and fitting in a big ride rather than a ton of big rides. We get into nutrition and an interesting joke about Chris Froome's post from 2016 and keto diets and racing, but really digs into some winter indoor training tricks. A really good answer, I think, of how to go pro in 2022, understanding how you younger riders can navigate that system. It's definitely a different world than the one Ian went through. And we had really started talking on Instagram about some etiquette in gravel racing and how to win with dignity and respect, while also, though, still being able to try to race against someone stronger than yourself when you might not be able to go pull for pull with them. So I think there's a lot of good insights from a super experienced rider. Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We greatly appreciate it. Hope you guys all enjoy the podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.
Good morning.
Hey, Ian, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great.
Thanks for making it early.
Oh, no problem, man. I love early. When you said you had something else, I was like, let's do it even earlier, man. I'm up. Let's go.
Yeah, perfect. And you're down in Boston, right?
No, I'm actually in North Carolina.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I used to be in Memphis and then just moved to Blowing Rock. It's just south of Boone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been great. Never lived in the mountains before. So
Awesome.
going from super flatland to 10,000 foot rides all the time.
Wow.
Yeah. You're used to that up there though.
Yeah, it's pretty much impossible to get less than pretty much every 10 miles. You get at least 1,000 feet of climbing. Regardless, it's like the flattest possible road you can find.
That's awesome. And I guess, is Bend the same way? Is there any flat? Can you ride around the mountains there? Like here, you're going up and over them all the time. I was in Bend once for that Oregon Trail gravel grinder.
Yeah.
And it was hilly on the race, but I remember doing a couple like pre-rides with a guy, and they were kind of like long, slow grinds. So you didn't really feel like you were climbing a ton. I mean, here if I wanted to do like a time trial effort, it's going to be mostly uphill. I found a couple valleys, but is Oregon similar to Vermont?
No, it's kind of similar to you said. Bend actually, I just was back a couple of weeks ago. I forgot how flat it actually is. It's east of the Cascades. So there's some climbs up into the mountains, but it's all pretty gradual. And, especially east of town is pretty flat. I was in Portland for a couple of days and it's hillier up there, but Bend itself is surprisingly pretty flat roads. There's some longer climbs, up to the mountains, and, it's probably similar to like Colorado, like Boulder or something. Like you can go up into the mountains, but we don't have as good a climbing as Boulder. And then the flats are pretty, just a high plateau.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like Boulder, but like the road surface is not that great. And at least from when I was out there, maybe it's changed, but I remember this is early, 2013, maybe. People were like, oh, you're going to love Boulder. You're never going to want to come back. And I was like, I don't know, compared to like where I was riding, the road surface was kind of annoying and never really didn't strike the biggest chord with me. I know people love it out there, but hey, would you be down to do video? I usually post this on YouTube also. And if it doesn't
work, it might affect my Wi-Fi. I can, but our Wi-Fi, we have like 1.5 megabytes download speed. And we can try it, but it might affect the audio.
It's all good. We can keep it just audio.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. One of the major issues of living where we do is the internet is pretty piss poor.
I was just on a farm. So do you use satellite Wi-Fi?
No, we don't have, we're hoping to get Starlink, but it hasn't come yet.
Okay. Yeah, I had to use Viasat, and I was doing like 20 megabytes a second. So I guess that's primo compared if you're doing 2.
Yeah. And we've looked at Viasat, but I guess there's like a monthly cap on it. which we'd probably, I mean, you could do it up to a certain point, but I'm doing enough. I mean, if I have to like go upload podcasts and stuff, I have to drive into town to do it. Cause I mean, it's virtually impossible for my
Oh, dude,
place.
I was doing so you can't see it, but I have like this Zoom background because I was in my car doing these in the post office parking lot because that's where I could get a cell signal. And Lauren's 10 down was on. He's like, "Oh, dude, I didn't realize this was like super pro." And I was like, "I'm in a parking lot. It's not. Trust me."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty crazy what technology can do these days.
Yeah. Well, man, thanks for doing this. This is awesome. The whole point of this podcast was we put out a lot of content just about training. It's me and a couple buddies. There's 5 of us now that are just amateur cyclists doing some gravel, doing road. One guy's big into cross, and we've all raced a ton, but we're just amateurs too. And that's kind of where we draw the line. We're pretty vocal and like, hey, we're just sharing our experience, but we would love to hear from other riders that have made the jump to the next level and then the next level. And then a guy like you who's been at the highest level of road, you're winning huge gravel races, just to hear a little bit, like pull the curtain back. What's Ian doing for training? Kind of what do you think about races? And if we have time, we'll chat a little bit about like nutrition and equipment stuff. And if there's a tangent that you want to share on whatever, we love that.
Okay.
Does that sound like a good sort of format for you?
Yeah. Sounds great.
Awesome. So if for people that are listening that don't know, Ian has an awesome podcast, Breakfast with Boz. And so the first question obviously has to be, what's for breakfast this morning?
Oh, I haven't had breakfast yet.
Oh, no way.
Not yet. No, our chickens started laying eggs again. There was a while this summer where they stopped laying. So probably something involving eggs, probably, I don't know, some type of omelet. And my wife just made up some cornmeal bread. So probably an omelet with eggs this morning. Keep it pretty simple. But yeah, I do love eating. And I mean, it's full on summertime here now. So our garden, my wife loves gardening. So we have huge gardens. So probably some spinach or kale from the garden, some eggs, and then some bread. Yeah, I mean, nothing too fancy this morning. My wife's actually heading off for a hike. So we tend to cook a nice breakfast when we're together. And since she's out and I'm, doing some stuff this morning, I'll wait and get some breakfast here at some point.
That's awesome. Do you guys make the bread or are you buying it from somewhere in Vermont?
No, my wife's making it. It's cool, especially this time of year when, the garden is just pumping. We probably do. I'd say this time of year, probably over 50% of our food is all homemade or homegrown.
That's
even from the jam and stuff is all, berries we've picked and foraged for. So yeah, we spend a lot of time cooking and, saving, canning food, jamming food, freezing food. So yeah, we, try to maximize this short window of summer that we have here in Vermont to, really stretch it out for the whole year and what we can grow or forage for.
I don't know if envy is the right word, but I wish I had a huge garden right now. I'm like, damn, I'm missing out.
Well, it depends really on how much time you have, because we were out in Oregon for a week and thankfully it just rained pretty much nonstop while we were away. So we didn't have to water anything, but coming home, there's a lot of weeding, mowing and weed whacking to be done just because everything exploded, which is great, but it's a lot to keep up with.
Yeah, especially I had chickens once and it was an interesting experience. It was a little bit more work than I expected, and that's like not much work. So
yeah,
I'm not
definitely just become part of our daily routine, I guess. Feed them in the morning, then we let them free range in the afternoon. We have enough acreage, and it's amazing though to see the change of the color of the yolks based off the winter when they're in the barn and just eating scratch compared to summertime when they're out eating bugs and whatnot. The yolks change colors tremendously in the summertime when they're just eating, foraging for bugs and little plants and whatnot.
So is it darker orange in the summer or lighter?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In the summertime, it's like they're very like almost like I don't know. They look very rich, and in the wintertime, they start to get a bit more pale. Probably more like a store bought egg. But it's when you make an omelet this time of year, they're incredibly yellow and vibrant.
That's awesome. So you mentioned routine. That's a good like foray into your overall routine. What's kind of so you're on a farm and you're growing a ton of your own food. How does life and training and racing sort of all fit in as we're in the middle of summer here, July 22nd?
Yeah, well, I mean, recently it's been kind of chaotic. I mean, really since Unbound, it's been, it's been a lot of travel, especially coming off of last year when I was at home nonstop and, really kind of got to fully delve into lifestyle here and being in one place. But I'm definitely a morning person. Usually wake up around, I don't know, 5 a.m. and, basic morning chores, first make a cup of coffee, look after the chickens. We got a puppy. And then, usually try to hammer out a bit of work because, I'm working full time at Wahoo. So I try to get work done early in the morning, kind of catch up on, stuff that happened in the afternoon or overnight, just because we have an international, presence. So people are working pretty much around the clock, which hopefully allows me to make a little bit of time for riding during the day. I don't really have a strict, when I was racing professionally on the road, like if I like always left on the bike before 10 o'clock, usually it was like 8 or 9 o'clock. I was out riding just to beat the heat. And then you could get back early enough and, take a nap and recover. Now that's not always the case. Sometimes I'm leaving for rides at 4 p.m. or, at 6 a.m., really just depends on kind of my work schedule, how I can fit it in. That's probably been one of the biggest challenges just as far as kind of balancing, life and work and training is, I am very much a creature of habit and I do love a routine and, like, cool, I'm going to leave every day at 9 o'clock. And that's been hard to like, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to ride today until 5 p.m. And sometimes, 5 o'clock rolls around. I'm like, oh, I'm kind of tired and I could just cook dinner and, chill out. So that's probably been the biggest challenge of, leaving the world tour and leaving this kind of lifestyle where your sole focus is racing and training. But still, making do. And as I said, the last couple months have been crazy, really since Unbound. I was over and came back for a couple of days and I went to Kenya, back to Vermont for a couple of days. And I was in Oregon and then down to BWR and San Diego. And then just got back here early Tuesday morning. So it's been a bit of a crazy month plus, but I'm here for 3 weeks before kind of the final few travels of the year, which is out to SBT and down your way to BWR Asheville.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, those will be good time. Have you ever done gravel worlds?
I have not. No, I mean, BWR was only my third ever gravel race here in the US. So I'm still pretty new to this as far as like events that I've gone to. And, I'm learning quickly how each event is so different and unique. I've done, some like gravel group rides here in Vermont, especially last year. But yeah, Rule of Three was my first gravel race here stateside in end of May. And that was, a very unique race. It was, a mix of road and single track and gravel. And then going to Unbound, which is completely different to Rule of Three. And then I just did BWR this past weekend, which was, again, a completely different event. So I've heard great things about gravel worlds. And I think it, just the location is probably fairly similar to something like Unbound, just as far as, kind of bigger, open, fast gravel roads, which is definitely my preference of surfaces to be riding on.
Super fast. We did 150 in 7.5 hours. And
Wow.
it was ripping. There are some, and it's never really, there's no real downhills. It's probably the least technical course that I've ever come across. And that's the one thing about gravel that's interesting that people talk about. Like there's no gravel grading system. Like you go to something like Mid-South gravel and it's like, oh, this is muddy. This isn't gravel. This is like clay. And then out in Oregon, they had a ton of sand. And I was like, this is interesting gravel. They're like, oh yeah, it's not really gravel. It's sand here. And I was like, huh, okay. I definitely don't have the tires for this. That's my bad.
Yeah. I mean, because the roads up here in Vermont are like, I would say probably the most pristine gravel roads I've ever ridden. You could ride a 25 mil road tire on most of them. I mean, that's kind of, speaking of the kit that I have with Specialized, the surface studies. And, it is funny how all these events got the name like gravel races and very few of them were actually gravel. Here in Vermont, we have dirt roads and, I would say that Unbound is, that those are gravel roads, but, growing up in Oregon, gravel roads are like gravel roads. It's like 3/4 inch gravel that they just dump on the road. And it's a mess to ride on any bike. Probably mountain bike's the best bike for it. So yeah, I mean, I think gravel, the term has kind of stuck, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe alternative surfaces would be a better name for these events.
I agree 100%. I got into gravel, just my teammates, we were doing it. And I was on a team that was sponsored by Allied. So they obviously have some big gravel bikes and like, dude, you should do this. And it's been fun. I really think I'm kind of going back more towards road and long road stuff. Like I don't even know about Lodija. It's a 200-mile road event out west. And just, I'm not really a big muddy off-road guy. I suck off-road handling and I'm just like, but it's actually really good to hear you talk about Vermont, because my friend, I was going to go up and do GMSR one more time. And we're going to do he's convincing me that I need to bring a gravel bike so we can just do like a 5-day big ride, go over to Lake Champlain. And he's trying to sell me on the dirt roads. And he's like, no, man, it's not like bad roads. Just like, it's more like hard packed and just, you can rip on them. But if you have a gravel bike, it'll be even better. I'm like, well, okay, maybe. So if you're kind of selling me on that idea now, it sounds sort of fun to be off the beaten path a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to in the state of Vermont, to be honest. I think 70% of all roads in the state are unpaved. So the paved roads tend to be, highways or, especially, I guess if you're over towards Champlain, there's more main paved roads. But up where I am in the Northeast Kingdom, it's like if I do a road loop, it's, not great roads, and they're oftentimes rougher than the dirt roads.
That's
so
exactly
Yeah, I mean, if you stay off the class 4 roads, I mean, you can get away with, if you could fit a 32 mil tire on your road bike, you can go pretty much anywhere, and you don't need hardly any traction. The roads are, I'm very spoiled to live where I do and have just the amount of roads and the quality of surface. It's pretty mind boggling. I've lived here for, I think, 4 or 5 years now, and I'm still finding new roads in my neighborhood, or, not say neighborhood, but in my area all the time. It's it's just such a maze and a network of roads and trails.
That's awesome. So let's talk about that. So when you're up there, you're training, you're doing these big alt surface events, we'll call them. What's super open-ended question? What do you see as like one of the most important aspects of your training now that you're not just racing? So you have a job, family over there, you're doing the farm thing. How does training fit into all this? What's the important piece to it?
A couple of things. I mean, I would say one of the biggest things is consistency. And, I don't have the time to train, I've done a few 20-hour weeks this year, but I don't have the consistency or the time to, do these back-to-back weeks. So I think for me, it's the biggest thing, because we have such a harsh winter and such a long winter here as well, just staying at a level of fitness throughout the winter that kind of allows me to, whether I go on a trip somewhere and do a little training block, or once the weather turns here, just like staying at a level of fitness that when I need to kind of ramp things up, I can. So thankfully I do work at WOW, so I have a kicker bike in my basement and do a lot of Sufferfest stuff. Relatively short stuff inside. I don't train a ton. When I'm inside, I don't do a huge volume. It's like, oftentimes I'll do a 45-minute workout in the morning and a 45-minute workout in the evening. And that kind of gets me through winter, mixing in some fat bike rides here and there and some backcountry skiing and skate skiing and ice skating and whatnot. But really just kind of like staying at a level of fitness where you're healthy and you could ramp it up and go do a 4-hour ride when need be. And, kind of the funny things, I just mentioned consistency, but I think the biggest difference now, and I kind of took this lesson off of Colin Strickland, is, very seldom am I doing stage races now. When that was kind of my specialty on the road was, back-to-back hard days, whether it's, a week-long stage race or something like a Grand Tour, where you really need this depth of fitness and kind of accumulated fatigue to handle something like a Grand Tour. Mm-hmm. So now, I really try and maximize the days that I do have, the time and availability and the weather's right to go do a big hard ride, really try to make those rides worth it. And when you look at a lot of these gravel events, most of them are a single day, there's a huge workload required. So, rather than doing like a 4-hour ride, a 5-hour ride, a 5-hour ride, it's like, maybe I'll do a 2-hour ride, an hour and a half ride, and then I have time to do a 5-6 hour ride. And so really maximizing my effort on those days. Mm-hmm. And, I used to train a lot off of power, and, obviously I still have a power meter and focus on, power, and we'll look at it afterwards. But I've changed the data screens around on my head unit to really just reflect what I think is now important, what is most important in gravel, which is speed. So on my Wahoo Bolt, I just have like literally the lap time, so how long I've been riding. I have the distance, I have average speed for the lap, and I have current speed. And so literally, I noticed this even at BWR. It seems like kind of the golden speed of almost any gravel event that I've done up to this point. Like the winning time or the winning speed is like around 20 miles an hour. So I literally would just set off in my house. I'll pick a loop and I'm just gonna say, okay, I'm just gonna try to do this loop and average 20 miles an hour. And these are kind of those bigger, longer rides. So it's gonna be 80 to 100 miles, just trying to average 20 miles an hour. And it's actually it's taught me a lot, which is it's funny to think that I raced in the world tour for 7 years and had access to some of the best coaches, and we were doing, I wouldn't say it was super specific training, but very structured training, very organized, very kind of thought out, which does work for road racing, kind of the demands of the road racing. But when you look at these gravel events, it's really just attrition and speed. And I think the biggest thing that it's taught me is how to ride fast and steady over a long period of time. If you're going out and doing intervals, or let's say you're just most people, I would say, go out and they get to a hill, they ride hard, and then they ease off over the top, and then they coast downhill. And now it's like, okay, like if I'm going to learn, and anyone who tries this kind of technique or training strategy will figure it out. Like you can and you notice it in races too. If you ride hard up the climb, like, and you push over the top, and then like really don't back off until you pick up speed, you go a lot faster. And I'm not looking at my power meter necessarily while doing this, but every once in a while I'll flip through the pages and see like, oh, here's my average power. But really just focusing on speed, and having my head unit set with that, average speed display right in front of me, I can just see like, all right, like, and kind of knowing the terrain, especially around here, like, where can I gain speed? Where am I know I'm going to lose speed. Just trying to keep that speed at 20 miles an hour, which is great training, and I think it's very applicable to a lot of these events when it's just, how long can you ride as, steady, but as fast as you want or as you can. And it's, and on days like that, I know we're going to speak about nutrition, but days like that, it's also important to practice your fueling strategy for these long events. And I think that's something that, people are switched on to, but probably one of the things people could probably improve on is, using those big days to actually like go about it like it is a race, practice a fueling strategy that you're going to use at, Gravel Worlds or Unbound. Cause it's amazing how much your body burns riding at that, kind of just like, people call it sweet spot or tempo, it's this zone that you could ride a lot harder for shorter or a lot easier for longer, but you're just at this incredibly efficient, inefficient rate of burning calories. You're just burning a lot. So if you can also train your gut on those days to actually consume, what you're burning as much as possible, and I think a lot of people, especially coming from a road background where, a lot of training is you are under fueled because you're, trying to make weight for, a grand tour, be a better climber. There's days in training when it's like, all right, this is like, I'm going to treat this like a race day. I'm going to have a big breakfast, rich in carbs. And then once I ride, like every 20 minutes, I'm going to be consuming or drinking, some sort of carbohydrate just to make sure that, you're really able to finish the, I'm gonna say the workout, but the ride, but also train your gut because, you get to an event like Unbound and you haven't practiced eating, the fuels that you're going to use in the race. It can be really hard on your gut and just training your body to process all of it. It's a lot of food. I haven't done the exact math, but I think in Unbound, I ate something like 6,000 calories plus, which is a lot to digest on the bike. And I think some people really struggle with that, but if you can get it down, it's all the better.
Yeah, that's crazy. So training the gut. Let's talk about that actually. So you mentioned rich in carbs. Let's talk about a pre-big ride or race breakfast in terms of what you're eating and how much earlier before the race are you eating it. Because some of these races are starting at crazy early times, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning. Are you getting up very early to eat before?
No, and I've never really had too many stomach problems in my life. Well, I've had a lot of stomach issues with Giardia, but not as far as like, regurgitating food in the race.
Okay.
And I guess that's also something that's so different with gravel than road is, oftentimes these, pro road races, they may start extremely hard. You may start on a climb. It may be an hour before the break goes and you're just like at threshold the whole time. In which case, eating, 2 to 3 hours before is important, just so you're not, your body actually has digested some of the food and it's not going to come up. But something like Unbound, I think we started at 6 a.m. and I probably had breakfast at 4:45, 5 o'clock in the morning, so an hour before the race. Just because it's like, that's an extra hour of sleep. And, I'm not panicked to, try to get my food down because I know the race isn't going to start in a full on sprint.
Mm-hmm.
And the closer you can have that food to, especially in, these longer events, the longer you can have that food digesting in your stomach, the more energy you're going to have. But yeah, my breakfast pre-race, usually, I mean, this is even true racing, is usually some type of oats or overnight oats. And I just got hooked up this year with Picky Bars, a company out of Bend that they make an amazing, the trail mix oat. And it's got oats and nuts and chia seeds. And most of these events I've just been making it the night before, just because then I don't have to think about it in the morning. I'll put some hot water in a big bowl of oats, let it soak overnight, leave it on the counter and just, wolf it down in the morning. If I have it with me, I'll throw in some nut butter or whatnot, but that's not something I always travel with, just to add a little bit more fat to it. But that seems to be my kind of go-to. And I think I do it at home. I don't have any issues with it, coming up. I think, it'd probably be different if I had, sauce. I feel like if I would have stomach problems, it would be if I had like sausage and, bacon and chorizo. That stuff seems to, not taste good on the other end. But yeah, I mean, just a relatively clean breakfast. I know people eat rice and, pasta or whatever. But I mean, really it's just finding, and that's one thing with nutrition is it's really just so unique to you and what works for you and your body, and everyone is different. So I think it's just a matter of really kind of pinpointing what works for you. Cause for me, oats and, some peanut butter work great, but for other people that might not be the optimal fuel. And I think that's one thing that, especially in this current, era of data and, being able to read what everyone else is eating and articles, people get sucked into like, oh, well, this is what Froome is doing, or this is what Geraint Thomas is doing, but that's not necessarily the best for everyone. Bodies are different, and, I don't understand all the science behind it, but I mean, different people just run better off of different things. And that can be just from childhood diet or, ethnic background. The Italians, like before every stage they would eat, a big plate of pasta. And I was like, I don't want to eat, I love pasta, but not for breakfast before a mountain stage. So it's really just kind of identifying what works best for you.
100%. That's huge. And I think that also goes to like what you've done previously in your life, have you trained your gut, like you're saying, so many small things. And I think to add to that too, because we are able to tap into an article that someone posted or their Instagram post, that's one piece of their nutrition, not the whole picture. And, I remember when actually you probably might've been on Team Sky when there was a ton of articles. Oh, Team Sky's all keto now. And Chris Froome doesn't eat carbs. And there were actually guys that I was racing against that were like, oh, I'm keto. This is what Chris Froome does. I'm like, okay, good luck with that. And we go into a race and they're off the back when things go hard. I'm like, dude, he might be using that as a strategy, but that's not his whole diet. Like, it's just, you gotta experiment with what you're reading about, because it might not work for you. And so it's good to hear you say that. Find what works for you, test it out. And then I think too, then you're confident about what you're eating and you come to race day, like not worried about just the food. You're thinking about the race and the performance there.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned Froome because I think we were in Australia at the Herald Sun Tour one year, and he posted a picture of like a hard-boiled egg and half an avocado.
Yes.
And said like, all right, let's go race. And I was like, Froome, you can't do this. Like,
dude,
this is so bad. Well,
that is it.
I mean, because that wasn't his breakfast. Like, he had that, but then he had like some toast. He had a bowl of oatmeal. I'm like, some kid is going to see this and think this is what they need to to win the Tour de France.
Dude, not some kid, a lot of people. Amateur.
Yeah.
I had just moved to Tennessee maybe, and people were talking about this, and I'm like, dude, there's no way. Like, it's
Yeah.
just not possible. And
Yeah.
no, man, this is what he posted. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
have fun with
Well, I
that.
mean, yeah, Froome's a joker. Well, and it's funny, at Sky we did do, and I'm sure they still do, but like, a fair amount of low carbohydrate training, which, which still means like, hey, you have a 3 egg omelet for breakfast, and maybe you throw some ham and cheese in there, so it's not calorie deficient, but it's carbohydrate, low in carbohydrates. But those training rides were very low intensity, and after 2.5 hours, then you start eating carbohydrates. It's really just to kind of get this, fat simulation, or, kind of this, your fat burning system operating earlier in the ride. So there's a way to do it, but it's not calorie deficient. And, kind of like that, what's that game, Telephone? It was funny. I remember when I went to Sky and we started doing this, and before I knew it, just living in Nice and Monaco, other riders in the area were coming up to me like, hey, I hear you guys are doing no breakfast rides. So our team's having us do like 6 hours, no breakfast, no food. And I'm just like, oh my gosh,
God.
like, it gets distorted so easily. We were doing a very specific, kind of strategy. It's like, you have a big omelet, cheese and ham. So you're getting plenty of fats and calories and protein. And then after 2.5 hours, you're eating normal again. You're having rice cakes and energy bars and whatever it may be. But other people just hear this like little whisper and like, oh, we should do this. And Froome's a joker. There was I don't think I've shared this with anyone. I'm sure it's been out there, but we were riding in Nice and Monaco with Sam Bennett a lot, and someone was just joking on a ride and was saying, oh yeah, Team Sky's on this like high onion diet. Like, yeah, raw onions have this really good like minerals and stuff that like really help performance. So Froome was totally bought into it, was like joking. So he started bringing onions in his pocket on the ride. And I swear that Sam Bennett must have like gone home and bought a bunch of onions and probably tried to take a bite out of a raw onion, because Froome was like, yeah, man, this is what we're doing now. Like, you get back and you just eat 2 raw onions. It doesn't taste great, but it really helps your performance. Which is so ridiculous. But
So
it's just like, it just kind of goes to show like how people are so curious about what everyone else is doing. I just remember Froome, riding around with like an onion in his pocket, pretending like, this was his food for the ride.
And I think, you can't do everything, and that derails some people, because then they're like, well, this person's doing this, and then they get on the next fad and the next fad. I'm like, find a plan that's working for you of some of the optimizations. You're not going to be able to get all of the marginal gains. Like, it's marginal for a reason. You can't, and so that's really funny to even hear pros talking about this and joking with each other and throwing people off track. That's hilarious.
Well, and it's something that I see as a big, I don't want to say a concern, but an issue with kind of, a lot of athletes in this day and age, and especially athletes who are, kind of up and coming, or, people who are, new to the sport, is we have this amazing ability to have so many metrics, whether it's, a power meter, a heart rate, strap, you have, a sleep monitor, you have now, glucose monitoring. And people are worried about all these little micro, calculations and micro, measurements, and they're forgetting about the macro. They're forgetting about like, hey, what about just going and riding your bike? You spend, 2 hours a day calculating all these metrics, and you're like, oh, I forgot to ride. And it's something that, they do provide an incredible amount of information and insight, but, for 99.9% of the population, like, riding consistently and just living like a healthy, balanced lifestyle is going to make you a lot better than, doing something that's so, such a fine tuning, piece of equipment. And, you can get to a point where, yes, like having a glucose monitor is incredibly beneficial and it can teach you so much, but you can't let it like take away time from doing the basics, which is, eating well, sleeping well, and, training hard. Like, it's still those 3 things. It's so simple and so basic. And I think sometimes it's almost so, trivial that people think they need to be doing more, because there is all this, access to other, metrics and measurements, that they forget that like, oh, I'm actually just not doing the basics things correctly. And it's just, it puzzles me to sometimes see what people are doing to try to find, a 1% edge, and they're missing 95% of what goes into being successful.
And that's the thing, the energy you put into that cherry on top from doing like a fasted ride and executing it the right way is go ride the bike, fuel your rides. Like, unless you're training 20 hours a week, you've done everything and you're looking for that 0.5% gain. Like, don't spend so much energy on that small little thing. That's the outtake right there. If I did outtakes, that's like the keep it simple. This doesn't have to be so complicated. And I love power. I love data. I love WKO, but it's what I look at all day because that's my job. And I love that other athletes want to get into that, but I'm like, you stop staring at charts, go ride your bike. And, I always tell the 8-hour athlete, I'm like, listen, if you went from 8 hours a week to 9, that's a 12.5% increase in training. That is huge. Can we find one more hour? Like, stop screwing around with these charts and graphs, go ride. And they're like, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Jumping way back, you had mentioned Colin, and you had mentioned the tip that you took from him. Was his tip the top speed thing for doing the rides? Just look at average speed, or what was he telling you about?
Yeah, I mean, about, riding off of speed, but, kind of also just off of like focusing on these specific days of big rides, rather than going out and doing like, again, like 4 hours, 5 hours, 5 hours, just like, hey, every, once a week or twice a week, go out and do this monster ride and just, smash it. Just like go do a big hard ride.
Totally.
Because ultimately that's what a lot of these events are. It's just a single effort, and I see, I know Stetna well, and he's obviously incredibly fit. You look at his training, a lot of it is very similar or even more so than he was training on the road. And people see that, myself and Pete and Colin and, Amity, like we all post our stuff to Strava so people can see what we're doing. But you also have to understand that someone like Stetna is, a phenomenally gifted athlete. His body is able to handle, 25-hour training weeks, week in, week out. Most people can't handle that, just with lifestyle and with recovery and, other things that are happening in their life, but they also probably don't need that. It was explained to me a while back, training is very much like a bell curve, so let's say if you're at 100% of like optimizing training, you're right in the middle. Most pros are actually on like the downward slope. They're overtrained. They're at 95% on the downward slope. You could also be at 95% on the upward slope, undertrained, slightly less training. But the difference being that, a lot of these world tour athletes are people that are, being followed on Strava and, talked about on forums, they are very, the best of the best as far as like human physiology, and their bodies can handle being overtrained. A lot of people, like, that's a slippery slope. Like once you start going down, you're getting ready to crash and tumble. So I think that's another like key point is, if you think about a bell curve, like you want to be in the middle at 100%, but you can be just as high on the upward slope of undertrained as you can on the downward slope of overtrained. And you might be at the same level. You might be at, 95% of optimized training, but you can be doing, 15 hours a week, or you could be doing 25 hours a week, and you're going to be at the same level of kind of fitness and, ability.
That's all. Yeah. That is always a little bit less. I mean, I think that's as being a coach, a lot of times is telling people what not to do. Like, it's when we feel really good, that's when we want to pour it on and do more. And it's like, no, man, this is the time to like, just get off the gas a little bit. Like you're flying. There's a point where that thing crashes and burns. So that's I love that visual of the bell curve. I've never heard that sort of said that way. And that's a really good way for people to kind of visualize their big picture of training.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one more thing to that.
Yeah.
There's also this term that was coined a few years back, like Stravanoia, which is like, people are paranoid of what they see on Strava. And it is funny because, you think about it and, what you see on Strava, what your eyes are glued to if you're scrolling through, your feed of other riders, what catches your eye is everyone's big ride. So maybe like I see, it's Monday and I see, oh, wow, Ted King did 6 hours. And the next day I see, oh, wow, like Pete Stetna did 6 hours. Oh, the next day Colin did 6 hours. I'm like, oh man, everyone's doing 6 hours. Because that's all you see is like you're drawn to these big rides. You're not looking at like the hour spin or the rest day. So you get in this mindset of people getting this mindset of like, oh, everyone's doing 6 hours every day, and not realizing like, oh, I didn't see, Ted's ride because he didn't ride today. So it's just like it blanks through your mind. And I think it's a real issue that people, do have the ability to see what everyone else is doing, and they start to panic like, oh, everyone's doing these huge rides. I better go do a bunch of huge rides. But you're not taking in the whole picture of like, all right, well, they're also taking rest days. They're also doing easy rides. But just with I think how our minds have changed with kind of these, flash images of what's happening, scrolling through Twitter, no one posts, I mean, people do, but like no one posts their, crappy 1.5 hour ride in the rain on Instagram. They post this, epic 6-7 hour ride through the mountains. And so you think, oh man, I'm missing out on it, but it's oftentimes not the case.
Catching only the highlight reel, not the chill day.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you're doing these, and then we'll move on from training after this question, when you mentioned, a lot of aerobic activities, skating, skiing through the winter up there. And then you had also mentioned some Summerfest stuff. Are you going hard then, or are you just getting on, if you did 2 of those 45-minute rides, would they both be like full blast, or do you do it through like a periodized program, or do you do it by feel? Or, because I know someone's going to hear, oh, he's doing 2 45-minute rides that are Summerfest, but they might not hear, oh, he's also skating, skiing, doing all this aerobic work. How's your big picture when you think of your off season of not racing? What are your goals with that training?
I mean, very, very, basically just trying to maintain a level of fitness that allows me to ramp things up when weather gets better. So the off bike stuff, whether it's skiing, backcountry skiing, ice skating, do a little bit of running in the autumn. That is all mostly it's mostly social exercise. I'll go skiing with some friends, or I'm with my wife. So it's mainly just hours and, just getting out and, exercising. Nothing specific when it's, I'm not trying to run up the mountain and, do as many laps as I can. Really just trying to make sure that I'm staying fit, staying healthy, exercising and not, getting so out of shape that it takes, weeks and months to kind of get back into shape. The workouts that are on Summerfest, I mean, if you've ever done it, a lot of them are very hard. I mean, given the name, they're very intense, but they also maximize, the time that you do put into them. So, a lot of them, there's a couple of key workouts that I do. I think one's called the GOAT. There's another one called like the Blender. That's maybe 90 minutes. And they're very intense, so it's, a lot of like high intensity training, but it's so short, it's like I said, 45 minutes, maybe 90 minutes a day, but very specific training. And, once in a while I'll sign up. They have different, plans you can, sign up for, and I'll, do a 10-day week-long plan. And, maybe there's 4 or 5 workouts a week. But other times, I'll just go on and select a workout that I know I enjoy. And, there's days when I still jump on and I'm like, oh, I'm not feeling great. I'll back off the intensity to, sometimes even 75% because I'm just not feeling great. And I think you do have to be cautious when you are riding indoors, because it can be so intense that it can be easy to overdo it, and especially on modern day smart trainers, there's no backing off. The trainer's going to keep putting resistance on until you hit that watt that the app says. So it's, it's in a way it's easy mentally to get through it because you just keep pushing. But, it's important, I think, for everyone to just check in with yourself and like, hey, how am I actually feeling today? And, I think, there's days to back it off and there's days to ramp it up. There's days when I back it up to 75%. There's days when I push it up to 110% because I'm feeling good. And I think, yourself being a coach, and I think a lot of coaches out there, I've just, kind of always gone off the theory of like, hey, on days that you feel good and you have the time, like, again, make those the big days. There's days when you feel crummy and you get through the workout and you have to push, you have to improve and get better. But there's days when you just feel horrible. You don't feel well, something's going on with your family, your household, or you're stressed with work. And, at the end of the day, stress is stress, and, piling on as much stress as possible is not always the best thing. So there are days to, maximize and really push through, and maybe you're not even expecting it. And there's days when it's like, hey, you know what? Like, for example, yesterday I went out and I was going to do a 3-hour ride and I did an hour. I was just like, you know what? I'm just tired. I'm not feeling it today. And, whether it's from residual fatigue from BWR or, it was just kind of rainy and dreary. And I was like, I'm just not feeling it today. There's so many factors I think that we still don't understand about the human body and psyche, even if it is something as simple as like, oh, it's just cloudy and windy today and I'm just not feeling it. And, working with Tim Carrison at Team Sky, we fill out like this metric every year, like, how do you rate yourself off of, 1 out of 10 based off of, all these different kind of categories of like motivation and perseverance and whatnot. He's like, the person who's 10 out of 10 is the person who never makes it as a professional athlete, because they're the one who goes out and does a ride on an icy day and crashes and breaks their collarbone, or they don't have a piece of cake on their birthday because they're so worried about their weight. It's like, you have to be in this balance of like being in like that 8, 9 out of 10 in all these categories is like optimal. The person who's 10 out of 10, like they're too extreme and they're not, they're just so laser focused on the training and these metrics that they're kind of missing the human element of it, which is so important.
Oh man. And just with, like you said before, with all the metrics show us only pedaling the bike, like exactly what you said, like something might be going on with your body. You might have just had an argument with your business partner, or your partner in life got sick or whatever. And like, then someone looks like, well, my CTL says I'm supposed to be really fast today. And it's like, oh man, this is like, you got to look big picture, look at the whole life as you as a human, not just this athlete. And it's awesome to hear you bring that to light of trying to take a step away from being too precise with it, even after a guy like you's been at the highest level. Being able to see that's a huge tip for people to take home. That's awesome. Let's talk about, one question that I've heard, just amongst fellow Cat 1 guys, or even people make it to the Conti level here in the US. Can you talk a little bit about when you went from Livestrong to Argos Shimano? Like, how did that unfold? Was it purely results? Was it networking? Was it you knew somebody that connected you with somebody and you got to go ride with these guys? And how does that work? Because I think there's a lot of missing links for athletes trying to get to the next level when they're coming out of the US, when there's not a lot of US based pro teams. I sure as heck don't have that answer. And so I always like to ask people, like, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would start by saying I think it is more difficult now than it was when I was, 18, 19, 20. When you look at, I guess this is like late, like 2009, 2010, 11, it was kind of this, even prior to that, it was like this very golden era of American racing. When I was 19 years old, I guess this was in 2010, I signed with Boswell Pro Cycling, and that was just one of many big kind of American domestic teams where guys, they didn't race in Europe at all. They, if you remember Ben Jacques Maines, he raced his whole career in the US. He made a decent salary, he raced maybe 30 days a year, but there was, Bissell, there was Kelly Benefits, there was Jelly Belly, there was Smart Stop, there was Kenda, there was all these teams where, riders could go from the junior ranks to, now it's really Livestrong or, Action is really the only team that is out there. And I guess Avolo as well. But I feel like there was a lot more opportunity back then than there is now. The national team had more funding. So, I was able to race with the national team and, just kind of by, I don't say luck, but just by, having those opportunities and then kind of having the right results at the right time. I raced on a team out in Oregon, like most riders in the US, I started off racing for a bike shop. It's $50 for a jersey and maybe you get a 20% discount at the bike shop. And just, raced well locally and then kind of, started going to nationals and performed well there. So I got picked up from the national team. And then from there, I got my last year as a junior, I raced for Hot Tubes, which is, probably one of the more premier junior teams, maybe internationally, just has a long legacy. So you do get more eyes just on what riders on that team are doing. Then I raced for Bissell for a year because, kind of a funky situation where there was going to be a kind of a Hot Tubes U23 team and it didn't happen. So that's why I didn't go to Livestrong my first year, because I told Axel I didn't want to race for their team because I was going to be racing for this other development team, and that fell through. So I raced for Boswell Pro Cycling as my first kind of, I guess, pro contract for $100 a month. They were sponsored by Kellogg, so I got a lot of cereal, and I lived off of cereal pretty much for a whole year because I was the closest person that lived to the service course. I would drive over in my little $600 Geo Prism and load up my car with Kellogg cereal. But then through Bissell, I had another good year and, did a good performance at Tour of Utah, and then got to go to Tour de l'Avenir. And so I signed a 2-year contract with Livestrong. And my first year, to be honest, I was pretty awful on the bike. I didn't really race well, didn't have any, major results, and just kind of got through it. But the second year on the team, I was kind of noticed by Argos and then Team Sky by some strong performances at Tour Utah, Tour de l'Avenir. I was second place at the under 23 Liège-Bastogne-Liège. And that's kind of how I got connected with those bigger teams. I guess at that time I did have an agent, who I was like, oh, cool. Like, someone approached me and was like, hey, I'd love to be your agent. I was like, oh, cool. That sounds like the big times. I should probably have an agent. In hindsight, and to be honest, I don't think it didn't make a difference. These teams came to me directly. So I was able to, at the end of the day, it's really, there's no substitute for performance, especially in this day and age. I know there's a lot of stuff, you can have a good social media and you can have a YouTube channel and this and that. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to make it to a professional level on the road, there's no substitute for having, good performances at big races and having, consistent performances throughout the year. And I think there's been American riders recently who have shown that. You look at someone like, Quinn Simmons, for example. He clearly performed incredibly well at, some very key junior races and got picked up by Trek. Where it does become more difficult now, which is, in a way fairly sad. I mean, to me, having these opportunities when you see, a lot of these riders don't have that opportunity anymore. There's not a Tour California, there's not a Tour Utah or Colorado where, maybe a young rider on a Jelly Belly or a Volo has a chance to really show themselves against, a more international field. So it has become more difficult for young riders, even riders in their, early to mid 20s to find an opportunity to show themselves, and especially the consistency. I think that's the biggest thing is, maybe a young rider, there's a friend here in Vermont, Brendan Rim, who I think he won Tour de Beauce a couple years ago. And, which is a huge result. He beat the whole rally team and there was, some international teams there. And, he's still, struggling to try to make it to the next level. He's racing on a small Belgian team and he's getting some opportunities over there. But, every year that goes by, it's becoming harder and harder to kind of make it to a Pro Conti team or a World Tour team. Just because also these World Tour teams are looking at riders who are younger and younger. The amount of riders that you see who are, first year out of junior getting pro contracts, that didn't happen. That, when I was first turning pro, it's like they wanted you to wait as long as possible to kind of take that step up.
It is, I think American racers are at such a disadvantage because, just like you said, mid-20s, a lot of people start racing maybe in college, a lot after college, or maybe they were a runner and they came over, or a rower or whatnot. And it's really hard to close that gap and make the connections and get to what you said, races consistently. There's just not the races to go to stand on the podium next to a guy that you read about in Velo News and look up to. And it's unfortunate. I mean, what would you say to somebody that's maybe, they're not in that, they haven't gone through the junior ranks and made those connections. Maybe so you get out of college at 22, 23, 24. Do you think they even have a shot of becoming I guess that you kind of mentioned social media, like what is pro now? There's so many ways. A guy asked me this. I said, well, do you want to be a UCI road pro or do you want to make a living cycling? Two different avenues. Like, yeah. Do people ask you that since you've been in the World Tour? Like, hey, what should I do now? Would you just say, get to the biggest races you can and get the best result? Or is there a more specific strategy?
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. And I think, you're right. Those are two very different avenues. And I had a talk with Fred Dreyer of Velo News out at BWR, and he was asking me, what does it mean to be an American pro now? And I came from a background very much like a pro rider, someone who's racing, in the, Pro Conti or World Tour level, or, even here domestically. But I think that's changed. I brought up, for example, someone like, the vegan cyclist or Phil Guyman, like, are they pro? Like, well, I mean, Phil doesn't even race, but he's making a living off of riding a bike. So it's like, he's technically professional at doing what he's doing. So it's really hard to, kind of like, what is pro now? It is hard to define. But I think if you do want to become a professional road racer, kind of that traditional, you're on a pro road team, you're being paid a contract to race your road bike. The best avenue is, you're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices. It is a harder kind of avenue to make it now than it ever was. I mean, with the lack of racing here in the US and the lack of teams, you probably are going to have to go base yourself in Europe and, get on a smaller, Belgian, French, or British team and work your way through, kind of just through the system, which can take a long time, and it may not come to anything. On the hindsight, or on the counter side of that, I think the coolest thing with American racing now is gravel, and the fact that people can they can go to college, they can be 22, they can get into cycling, and they can work hard and train, and then get to a point where they really just show up to a gravel event, given they get an entry, and you're on the start line with the best gravel racers in North America. And you have instantly an opportunity to show yourself and what you're capable of. I mean, you think about road racing, it's a long, even if American racing was as it was when I was coming up, you think you start off as a Cat 5, then you have to go to Cat 4, 3, 2, 1 pro, and it can take years to get to a Cat 1 license, and then you're trying to get a pro license. So that can take many years. Rather, you look at gravel, it's like you can just be an incredibly strong rider and have never done any races. You could sign up for Unbound and have all the skills and ability, and literally within 10 hours change the course of your life, which I think is so cool to see that these gravel events in a way have provided another avenue for athletes to make it to a pro level. Someone like me winning Unbound, like Jonathan Vaughters didn't ring me up and offer me a contract on EF like he did Colin, because I've already done that. But if you're a young athlete and you win one of these events in a very impressive fashion, like those possibilities could still happen, to pursue a road career. But there's also kind of a growing market for being a professional gravel racer, and kind of doing the privateer thing, like Ted or Pete or Colin, which is cool. It's, in a way, I think American racing has been trying to find its, how it looks. And, I think gravel and crit racing is a, very uniquely American way of riding and racing a bike. And it would be awesome to see that kind of grow, and not try to, Tour California was such a cool race, and same with Utah and Colorado. And, but it's becoming harder for those events to just operate, whether it's budget or, permitting, licensing. It is challenging for those events to happen. And that was very much trying to copy a European model. So if we can, really create something that's unique to, our geography and our landscape, but still provides opportunities for people to make it to that next level, that's kind of the ultimate goal, I think. And one thing that I'm seeing more possible with kind of the growth of gravel racing.
So this is good. Let's actually, I forgot, we got to jump into the question that actually started our conversation on Instagram. And I know you got another call coming up, so we can be brief with it, but we were you had mentioned on a podcast, and I think this is good for people to hear that are trying to be that rider that shows up at a gravel race, and you're racing most likely better people than you. And, you had made a comment just that, you want to make sure that people are always pulling through and working. And I found myself in a position before in 2 different gravel races where I was in 2 different scenarios, but with stronger dudes. One time I had been up the road for about 70 miles, and instantly these guys bridge up to me and are like barking at me to pull through. And I'm like, yo, dude, I got to catch my breath. Like, you guys have been sitting in the group. And one guy who's a really well-known racer is like, I'm going to start attacking you. And I was like, okay, man, go for it. Like, I'm not going to be yelled at a gravel race to pull through when you just bridged up to me. And another time, a guy was just much stronger and I couldn't pull through. And he's like, dude, pull through. And I'm like, I'm behind you doing 500 watts. I don't know who you think I am. I just literally can't do it. And so you had made a comment. That's when I reached out to you, like, hey, just an honest question. Like, what does someone do when they are not as strong? And if I'm with Ian Boswell, I'm going to try and work with you. If you're stronger, man, like, I'm not going to let you just ride away. Like, I'm there to try to win too. And I think it's your responsibility as a stronger guy to drop me. Like, and then we kind of went back and forth of just like, isn't part of racing the tactical side where like I need to appease the people in the breaks so they're not mad at me for maybe sitting on every other pull or something, but that doesn't mean I'm letting you win. Like, so how do you see, what would you tell somebody in that situation? Like, how does the new guy on the come up, like if he's not strong enough and still there to win, like isn't it up to the stronger guys to drop him at some point? And if he can hang on, like, so be it. Like, you got to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very hot topic in gravel, and I've spoken, even just this last weekend at BWR, I spoke a lot about it with Colin, and at the moment there's not really many gravel teams, and in most of these events, a team is relatively useless. I think it will come where there are teams and tactics. And I guess it's, everyone approaches gravel differently. Not to say that I'm on the downward slope of my career, but I can kind of stay at the level I'm at for hopefully, quite a bit longer, but I'm not trying to go back to the world tour or, make it to the next level. And there is this, kind of core value of gravel where it's like, and I do think this is true, that I think how you win these races is much more important than if you win these races. And I think that is something that holds very true to kind of the ethos of gravel, like winning with honor rather than with, I don't want to say with like cagey tactics, but like, when Colin won Unbound, it was like, what an impressive performance. And because he won it in the way he did, I think that's why he got so much attention. And that's why JV reached out and was like, hey, do you want to race in the world tour? Like, this was just an incredible human performance. Had he sat on and, not pulled and then sprinted someone at the end and won, I don't think that he would have had the same amount of, kind of respect or offers that he had because of how he won. I've spoken to Payson about this as well. He said that, especially now more so than ever, how you win is much more important than if you win. And I think that also goes for, partners of these athletes who are, kind of competing at the front end. They would love to see someone win in a very, kind of passionate and honorable way. The gravel racing scene is still so small. It's, tends to be the same 10, 15 people at the front of every race. And there is an athlete currently racing who was at Unbound and at BWR who is starting to get a very bad reputation for not working. And there's really nothing you can do, but I would say it's better to have friends than it is to have enemies.
Totally.
And I guess I've recently come up with my own, I don't say, way of riding, but like I guess it doesn't apply to everyone because I do realize I have this depth of strength from years racing in the world tour. But like my mindset in these gravel races is like, I'm going to keep, like, once there's been a selection, obviously, you don't need to be pulling in the first 10 miles of Unbound when you have 200 miles left to go. Cause that's just, a big waste of energy if you're pulling through and pulling everyone. But once there's been a selection and, you're kind of in this select group of riders, my mindset is like, I'm going to pull through until I either win or I get dropped. And which is stupid if you're trying to win the race. But like, I would personally, I would much rather win with like pride of knowing like, hey, I contributed, I gave everything I had. And, I either won or like, hey, you know what? Like those guys, the other athletes were stronger than me and they beat me and it was a fair battle. And I think that's what kind of this whole conversation stems from is people wanting it to be a very fair fight. And I think that that's what, and it's been easy in the sense that gravel is so small and it is, largely a handful of people competing against each other and they're all kind of at the top. And I do see that's where the issue lies is that, the people at the top want it to stay the way it is, but people who are kind of on the upward trajectory, in order for them to potentially kind of like, break into that next level, they need to be a little bit more cagey and a little bit more, thoughtful in how they race. And, not everyone has a huge engine and someone, may be more technically savvy or more, tactically, have instinct that other people don't have. So, and I'm not the correct person to answer this because like I said, I've only done a handful of races and my perspective is very much like, I would rather win based off of, strength and I don't say dignity, but, honor amongst my fellow competitors than I would sit on and sprint. And, especially because I am friends with a lot of these riders, I don't want to go to the next race and, have, Ted or Colin or, look at me like, hey man, like what were you doing last week?
Yeah.
I'd much rather like have these guys be like, that was impressive.
Yeah. We're on the same page then, because definitely with dignity, definitely giving it your all. I would never promote just being that guy that sits on. That's annoying. The thing that happened to me was, and this is why it crushed me. And this is one reason why I ask people, It was Eric Marcotte, who we've talked about this a few times. Afterwards, it was in Gravel Worlds, and like my wheels were falling off. And I'm like, all right, you know what? Eric starts attacking. John Borselman, who won in 2019, is just like crushing these hills. And I'm at the point where I'm like, dude, I am roasted. But if they attack, I'm gonna I'm like, one of these, I'm about to pop. And so I would lash back on. I would get dropped, come back on. And then they'd ask me to pull through. And I'm like, yo, dude, are you seeing me on these climbs?
Yeah.
So fast forward to like 5-6 months later, we're at a Grand Fondo in Dallas with Emmett Smith. And Eric attacks and I follow him. And again, like just redlining, I'm going to go with you and I'm going to help you when we get away. But I'm trying to stay with you. And he goes, yo, man, I know how you race. And it crushed me because Eric Marcotte is a dude that is like, I look up to him so much. He's, a professional in business. He's won US pro, like just an absolute boss. And so I went up to him afterwards and I'm like, yo, man, I think we're mistaken here. Like, do you realize how strong you are? I'm not trying to sit on your wheel and not pull through. I literally can't. Like, I don't know if you understand how strong you are sometimes. And he goes, well, you know what? He's like, I actually read your blog from Gravel Worlds. And I was like, you did? And he was, because I do a lot of blogging and stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, my buddy sent it to me. And you said in there that like me and Borselman were yelling at you. And I'm like, yeah, you guys were. He's like, let me tell you this. He's like, if people are yelling at you, it's probably because they just think that you can do it. And I was like, well, I appreciate that compliment. But at that moment, I couldn't. And so we both did road amateur nationals this year. And he rolled up to me after the race. He's like, yo, dude, I didn't win, but had a pretty decent attack. At the end, I played my best cards and he rolled up to me and gave me a compliment. I was like, hey, man, that means a lot coming from you, especially with our history. Like, you never want people to think you're this crappy, shisty, not working. And like you said, just sprinting people at the end with like a cheeky move. That's not cool. But I just felt like gravel was only getting this like watts competition. And I still want there to be the sportsmanship racing. Like, if there's a guy that's not as good as me because he's not as strong, I still think he deserves to have a chance to win. But yeah, don't just sit on my wheel and be kind of like a tool about it. But I'm glad. It's good to hear more of the full story of how you see that in racing. And you said it well, win with honor, win with like dignity. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that, because it is something that we all want. If we go to a gravel race, like that's part of the fun, man. Like, I love being able to line up with a guy like Colin and Ted and, Payson, if I ever race against you. And even though I'm not as strong, I'm going to try and hang on as long as I can. And maybe the stars align or something, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's and very much so, this whole discipline of racing is still figuring itself out. And I think it's going to change a lot in the coming years. And I think, like I said, that, there have, in a way, we're kind of like setting the groundwork of like, how do these races happen? How do they play out? Like, how do we approach an aid station? And I think that's where, again, kind of back to these marginal gains of, people will start to figure out like, oh, cool, I can, somehow skip an aid station because I have, and that was one of the things that kind of bothered me at Belgian Waffle Ride was, the front group had a lead moto who was handing them water, which is like, great, you don't have to stop for water. But like, if you're, I came out of the first section behind and like we had no water, and I didn't know that, people had people on course, handing up bottles at the aid station. I'm like, is that really fair? I mean,
yeah,
it is, because like people can, happens if you go to Green Mountain Stage Race, you might have your, partner out there or a teammate or a friend handing up bottles, but it very quickly, I think, deteriorates the sport, because then it does make it an elite sport where, hey, if you have money to hire someone or to bring out an extra guest to hand up water, like, you're at a huge advantage, because that's 30 seconds at every aid station. You don't need to stop. And so that's where like I would draw the line. And like, I don't think events should have outside support beyond the Unbound. Okay, you have to have someone provide you water. Like, that's a very clear rule in the event. You have to have someone there. But and not to say that, because that is a tactic for someone. Someone's like, hey, I'm going to ride with 2 hydration packs so I don't have to stop at the aid station. And I guess you potentially may pay a penalty for that because it's heavy, but you think about something like, Unbound, like how much does it really slow you down to carry a hydration pack? Probably not very much. But when people try to, I don't want to say exploit the system, but in a way kind of, play it cagey and like, oh, I have, the resources to bring in, 3 friends to stand at all the aid stations and hand me bottles. Is that fair to that young rider who's trying to come up through the ranks and, literally just made it on a shoestring budget, made it to the event, got signed up, and like, he only has 2 bottles at his house. And so he needs to stop and fill up. He's not going to be throwing bottles and, has a surplus of bottles. Like, and that's where I think that we as kind of as racers and kind of people pioneering this sport need to be careful of like, how can you make it as fair as possible for everyone involved? Because the person who just, showed up and, barely made it there because the cost is, astronomical. When you look at flights and registration and hotels, okay, all of a sudden they need to bring an extra person to have a rental car and hand them bottles. Like that's not, I think we very quickly just return to road racing where it does become this, elite kind of exclusive sport. And
there is,
you have to be on a team.
There is an elite group, no doubt. I've heard other top riders say that they've at least noticed that it's becoming a little less grassroots, but just like anything, it gains popularity, money's going to follow it. There's going to be more sponsors, more. If you watch any of the Unbound videos, you see certain people rolling into pretty Gucci filled out tents where they hop off and everything's just done. Yeah. So, well, I think the summation to all that is go out, get some good results, get some sponsors. Like you just got to keep building yourself up somehow. And you said it's not going to be easy. Whether you're trying to be a pro gravel racer or a pro road rider, there's no easy road to that. So just for the person listening, got to be willing to put in the work one way or the other. And as long as you're enjoying the journey and the process, it'll be worth it, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of a great way to, wrap this up is there's really no substitute for hard work. And, because of the current, data world we live in of Instagram and YouTube, people see these riders at the top and you see this glamour, you see, oh, cool, he got a new bike or, he's doing this cool trip. But like no one saw when I was 15, 18 years old, like, spending Christmas alone in Europe at a shitty hotel doing a training camp, riding on Christmas morning by myself because I wanted it so bad. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very easy for, a younger generation, just people who are new to it to like see what's happening at the front. And for these, kind of, key athletes to see like, oh, wow, like they have it so easy. But it's like, regardless who it is, whether it's, Amity or myself, like everyone has gone through a hardship and made huge sacrifices to get to the point to where they are. And I think that, it's easy to sit behind a screen and, kind of complain about like, oh, well, they had an opportunity that I didn't. And, cycling does need to become more inclusive and does need to provide more opportunities to people. But at the same time, at the end of the day, hard work ultimately that's the ticket to success. And there's really no substitute for that.
Awesome, dude. Ian, thank you so much for doing this, man. Greatly appreciate it. And hopefully buy your coffee sometime in Vermont or at a gravel race. And best of luck with the rest of the summer racing. And we'll catch up with you soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man. Take care.
You too.
See ya.